everyone, welcome back to Kidding Around. My name is Melanie Smith and I am thrilled that you are here with me today on another Thoughtful Thursday. Today we will be making chicken noodle soup for a neighbor or a friend. Before we do that though, if you like what you're seeing here and want to follow along with all of Kidding Around's videos, please make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel, and also if you really like what you're doing here, please share us with your friends. Thank you so much. All right, well, let's move on to our Thoughtful Thursday. So today happens to be National Homemade Soup Day, or at least that's according to my holiday a day calendar. But I thought it would be fun to celebrate that and make some of our own homemade chicken noodle soup. I know that when I am feeling under the weather, chicken noodle soup always seems to make me feel just a little bit better. So I thought it would be really fun to be able to make some chicken noodle soup so that you could give it to a neighbor or a friend if you heard that they were feeling a little bit under the weather. So this isn't super hard. It is something that involves the stove and it involves sharp knives. So this is definitely something that you need parental or adult supervision and permission to do, okay? Make sure you've got their permission and their supervision before you start this. All right, so we are going to just jump right in and I am going to tell you the things that you need to make your own homemade chicken noodle soup. The first thing, well, actually, let's talk about the equipment that you will need. So you will need a large stock pot. As I mentioned, you will be using this on a stove burner. You will need a knife to chop. You will need a cutting board. You will need some measuring cups and some measuring spoons. And the rest of the stuff that you will need is all food related. So the things that you will need are some cooked chicken. If you don't have cooked chicken, you buy it at the store raw usually. You can cook some ahead of time, but this definitely needs to be pre-cooked. All right, so then you will need 4 cans. I've poured all of the cans into this pitcher, but you will need 4 cans of chicken broth. You will need 1 can of vegetable broth. Let's see, I'm trying to make sure I have room for you to see everything. You will need some butter. You will need some oregano and some basil. You will need some egg noodles because chicken noodle soup needs noodles. And then you will need some celery, some carrots, and an onion. And then you will also need at the very end some salt and pepper to taste. So let's go ahead and get started. You know, one thing that I forgot to mention, the most important thing of all, you will need this recipe. So we are going to follow along with this recipe, and this recipe is linked below this video so you can have access to it on your own. Okay, so the first thing that I am going to do is kind of clear out a little bit so I have some room to move, and then we will get going. All right. My goodness, it's always fun cooking, but sometimes it's a little bit cumbersome to just get started. Okay, I knew I needed my cutting board, so here we go. I am going to follow this recipe. I'll see if we can make it so that you can see it the whole time. All right, so it says we need 1 tablespoon of butter. We need a 1/2 cup of chopped onion. We need a 1/2 cup of chopped celery. We need 4 cans of chicken broth, 1 can of vegetable broth, 1/2 pound of chopped cooked chicken breast, 1 1/2 cups of egg noodles, 1 cup of sliced carrots, 1/2 teaspoon of dried basil, 1/2 teaspoon of dried oregano, and salt and pepper to taste. It's always good to go through your recipe and make sure that you have all of the ingredients you need before you get started. There's nothing worse than getting halfway into a recipe and then realizing there's an ingredient that you are missing. All right, so we are going to go ahead and chop our vegetables. So it says we need a 1/2 cup of chopped onion. So I am going to chop this onion. Now this is a large onion and it will definitely provide more than 1/2 cup. So the first thing that I am going to do is just get all of this dried skin off. So I do that by cutting the ends off of the onion and then just starting to peel back. So I just kind of dig in here until it feels like I have gotten down to the kind of wet part of the onion, or the part that doesn't feel so dry at least. And then I just peel it back. Sometimes it takes a little bit of muscle, but you always can get there. All right, and then I will just put this peel and stuff over. I would actually put it in my trash can if I were in my kitchen, but I will just put it out of the way for now. Now, as I mentioned, this is a very large onion, so I know that I will not need all of this to make a half of a cup. So I am just going to cut a little bit of the onion off, and let me put the rest of this onion somewhere that it doesn't get the rest of the studio all stinky. All right, so because I have cooked quite a bit, I think this will probably give me about half of a cup of onion. So I am going to just start cutting. Now, like I mentioned, I think this will give me about half of a cup. I could be wrong. This is just something that you learn with experience though. So I am going to just cut into this onion, and if I don't have enough, if I don't have my half a cup at the end, then I will slice off some more onion. Now it looks like I didn't quite get that top dry layer off, so I am just going to peel that off right now. And then I am just going to cut. You can see that I'm making long slices, and I'm being very careful with my knife. I am keeping my fingers out of the way, and then I am going to turn it, as you just saw, and I am going to cut the onion the other way. Lots of times when you cut onions, your eyes will start to burn and tear up. I have heard, and I try to do this, I've heard that if you breathe through your mouth as you are cutting your onion, that won't happen so much, because I think the smell gets into your eyes, and so if you're like through your nose. So if you're breathing with your mouth, it's a lot less likely to be able to get in through your nose and irritate your eyes and your nose. I don't know if it works or not. It seems to work for me most of the time. All right, so now you can tell because of the way that the onion is formed, now because I cut one way, turned it, cut the other way, and because the onion is in layers, now I have some little pieces of onion. And so this is kind of a big chop, but I don't worry too much about that in soup. If I wanted a finer chop, I would cut it a little bit differently, but because I want kind of a big chop, I just cut it one way, turn it, cut it the other, and then we'll call that good. Okay, so after I have my onion, I'm going to go back to my recipe, and I'm going to see I need a half a cup of chopped celery. So I am going to pull out my celery, and I am going to pull out, I think I'll go with 2 of these aren't stalks, I've had this thought before, 2 pieces of celery, and I'm going to go ahead and just cut the end off. There's just a little bit of dryness on the end, so I will cut those off, and then I am going to cut my celery. And again, I am just kind of eyeballing this. You know, in cooking, there are lots of times you need to be very exact. I will tell you, with soup, putting in ingredients like onions and celery, you don't need to be super exact. So I'm going to get close to my half a cup. If I'm a little bit over or a little bit under, I'm not going to worry about that. It is really important in baking, and in cooking it is important in some areas too, but so I'm just kind of basing some stuff off of experience, and that's just stuff that you get as you cook. So you should cook more and more, and you will get more experience and knowing about how much you need to make a half a cup of celery or a half a cup of onion. I can tell you here, I know I have more than half of a cup of onion, but that's okay. That's okay. You know what? I actually really like onion in soup, so that's okay with me. So you can see that I sliced the celery, and now I am going, and in these chunks that it's still in, I'm cutting it in half just to make the chunks a little bit smaller. If one gets in there that's a little bit bigger, that's okay. This will cook down a little bit, so it won't be huge pieces of celery in your soup. All right, so now we are going to look at the instructions. And because I looked at the instructions, I knew that it was right to go ahead and chop these first It's always important, I mentioned, to read through the ingredients, but you should also make sure that you're also reading, or you also read the instructions before you get started. So we should have done that, but I did do that. So that's how I knew I could go ahead and chop these, and they would be needed early on in the recipe. All right, so now let's read it. It says, in a large pot over medium heat, melt butter. Cook onion and celery in butter until just tender, about 5 minutes. Okay, so now we are going to go to our stove, and I am going to put a tablespoon of butter in my pot. So did you know that butter has tablespoon markings on it on the paper? So this is a piece of butter that I've used already. There are 8 tablespoons in a normal stick of butter, and so I have used 5 of those tablespoons, but I can go ahead and I can just cut through the paper at the mark between the 6 and the 7 tablespoons, and now I have a tablespoon of butter. It's really hard to measure butter if you don't do it this way, so this is my little secret tip. I have met people who measure it differently and it seems so hard. So that's how I do it. There are many ways to do it though. All right, so I am putting this butter over medium heat, and I am going to just I'll wait for it to melt a little. As it gets hot, it will obviously start melting, and then I'll kind of swish it around in the pan. It shouldn't take too long for that to happen. Oh, you know what? Except the burner needs to be plugged in. Excuse me while I plug my burner in. Of course, if you're baking on it, or if you're cooking on a stove, you won't need to worry about doing that, but the first rule of electricity is plug your appliance in. All right, so now I see the light on and it will start to melt pretty quickly. Okay, so let's read again what we need to do. In a large pot over medium heat, melt the butter. Cook the onion and celery in butter until tender, just 5 minutes. All right, now let's go on and we'll figure out what we need to do next. It says then, pour in, so this is after the 5 minutes, it says pour in chicken and vegetable broths and stir in chicken, noodles, carrots, basil, oregano, salt, and pepper. Then it says bring to a boil, then reduce heat and simmer 20 minutes before serving. So we are going to be able to be cutting our carrots as we wait for our onions and celery to tenderize here in the butter. All right, so I can see this butter, you can actually see it's sliding around on its own right now. So it is definitely melting, so I am going to just help it along a little bit. I am going to cut it. Sometimes, all the time, if you cut it, it will make it melt just a little bit faster because now you have 2 smaller pieces that will be melting. All right, so that is almost done. Now we are going to measure our celery and onions. And like I said, I don't worry too much about getting these celery and onions measured exactly. If you were baking, you absolutely need to make sure that you've got the right amount of flour and the right amount of sugar and baking soda and baking powder, because baking is much more about chemistry, and things don't work if you have the wrong measurements, but when you're cooking, it's a lot more to taste. So you can see here I have a 1/2 cup of onions. I am going to go ahead, I think my butter is melted enough, I am going to go ahead and put those onions right there in that pot. I am actually, like I said, going to add a little bit more because I love onions. All right, and now I will take my celery and I will measure out a 1/2 cup of that. And I was a little bit closer on how much celery I had. So I am going to add that, and then I'm going to add the rest too because I love a little bit of a crunch in my soup. All right, so now that is going to just kind of sit there. We're going to just agitate it just a little bit as the time goes on. That will just help the butter help make these vegetables in here a little bit more tender. All right, so I'm going to put this over on the side for now because it needs just a few minutes to tenderize. And we are going to go ahead and start cutting our carrots. All right, so here it says we need 1 cup of sliced carrots. So I am going to go ahead and bring my carrots over. Now these have been washed, and I am going to cut about a cup. Again, this is the same type of thing. This is not the chemistry that we worry about in baking. So if I go a little over or a little under, that's totally okay. I'm going to turn that down just a little bit. It seems like maybe this burner is running a little hot. All right, so those are just tenderizing. That's great. Now I am going to cut my carrots. And I love carrots in circles, in soups. So I am going to just cut straight down the carrot. Now I'm being very careful and making sure that my hands are out of the way as I'm putting down my knife. And I am just cutting down the row. All right. You can cut one carrot at a time too. It's probably easier to start with one than cutting two. You know, I have a tendency to be an impatient cook. I'm always excited to be eating, so I try to cook sometimes a little bit fast. So I'm cutting two, but you can definitely start with one. And like I said, just a reminder, this is with adult supervision and permission. You're of course doing that, having that, because this is hot around and sharp around. All right, so I am going to measure these. Now, the recipe calls for 1 cup of carrots, so I am going to bring over my cup, and let's see, I'm getting close, and I think I will cut just a few more. It never hurts to have a few more vegetables. Do you think so? All right, and now I'm just going to flip this around a little bit. That seems like it's going very well. Oh, I wish you could smell it. It smells so good. I have always said that if you want a good smelling house, a house that smells like you're really a good cook, put some onions on the stove and just heat them up because it smells so good. I love the smell of onions. All right, so I am going to cut a few more carrot coins here, and that looks pretty good. I think we'll go with that. Clearly that's a little bit over my cup. It's a little bit overflowing, but that's okay. A few extra vegetables are always, always yummy. Okay, so now let's continue on, and remember, we'll reread our recipe. I reread recipes all the time because I want to make sure that I'm doing them correctly. And while I'm thinking about 3 other things going on, I'm thinking about chopping the carrots, and I'm thinking about these tenderizing, I may forget what I read. So I'm going to go back now. So these are, the onion and the celery are cooking in the butter. Then you pour in the chicken and vegetable broths and stir in the chicken, noodles, carrots, basil, oregano, salt, and pepper. So we are almost ready to put the rest of this soup together. I'm going to flip around these items just a little bit more. They are really starting to tenderize, so we are very close. So I'm going to reset here just a little bit and make it so we can finish our soup together. All right. So here I'm going to pull over this burner, and of course when you are cooking, you realize that not only is the burner hot, the pan or the pot on top of the burner is hot as well. So I'm only going to be holding this pan, or this pot, this is a pot, by these rubberized handles to make sure that I don't burn myself. Okay, well, I think these are tender. When I cut into them, there isn't that major crunch that I obviously felt and heard as I was cutting them as they were raw. So I think we are going to head on to the next step. All right, so again, it says pour in chicken and vegetable broths. Now, I have already measured these. So this here is 4 cans of chicken broth. So I am pouring that in very gently. All right, and then it also says to pour in the vegetable broth. So here we go. Pour that in. All right, and because of all of this liquid being poured in, the heat on the pan has lessened a little bit. So you probably, I don't know if you can hear it sizzling on the video, but the sizzling has stopped. But don't worry, it will continue to heat up all of the stuff that you just put in there. All right, and then it says stir in chicken, So we'll go ahead and we'll put in our chicken, and I am realizing that I forgot to tell you to bring a spoon. A spoon is always good for stirring. I can use my knife a little bit, but you should have a heat-proof spoon or spatula to help you stir. All right, so I poured in chicken, vegetable breast, chicken. Now I'm going to pour in the noodles. So I'll open my noodles. And I need a cup and a half of noodles. Now I realize that I have my cup already full with my carrots, so I'm going to use my half cup and I will fill it 3 times. That's 2 half cups and another one. All right, so this is a half a cup, so that's number 1. All right, and now I'll fill it again. And so this is number 2, which means I have put 2 half cups in there, so now it's a whole cup in there. And then I will put my last half cup in there as well. All right, and there we go. So now my noodles are in there, and this is the time you would grab your spoon and kind of stir it around, make sure all those noodles are below the broth. Okay, so we poured in the chicken, the noodles. Now we'll put in our carrots. So there we go. I'm trying not to splash. I get really low to the broth and I dump in carefully, and that helps me to keep from splashing. All right, and then it says basil and oregano. So I come down here and I need a half a teaspoon of basil. So I will grab my measuring cups and I find my half teaspoon, and then I will take my basil. And oh, this is a brand new basil. I just pulled it out of the pantry. I guess the last time I used basil, I finished it up. So I have a brand new one. And then I am going to pour over my pot. And again, spices are a little bit like vegetables. It's okay if it's a little bit more or a little bit less. You'll learn which spices you like, and then you'll learn how you like them in your food. So you can add more or less as you like them. All right, and then we also need a half a teaspoon of oregano. This is a little bigger, so I can just kind of scoop out, level it off, and then I'll put it in there. All right. And then it says we should be using salt and pepper, and down here in our ingredients it says salt and pepper to taste. So that's, again, kind of like with the spices. If you know that you like salt, then you can add more salt. If you don't like as much salt, then don't add as much salt. All right, so I am going to add just a little bit of salt here, and then I am going to add just a little bit of pepper. This is kind of what my taste preferences are. Yours may vary. All right, there we go. Oh, it smells so good. I wish you could smell it. All right, or maybe you're cooking along with me and you are smelling it. That would be great. All right, so now I am using my knife, but it should be a spoon, and I am stirring it just to make sure that it is all mixed up. And there we go. All right, now let's return to our recipe. And our recipe says, bring to a boil, then reduce heat, and simmer 20 minutes before serving. So at this point, we are just going to wait for it to boil. I'm going to put a lid on. That will keep more of the heat in and will allow it to boil a little bit faster. So now it's waiting time. All right, so I have left this pot over medium heat on the stove, and I'm here to see if we are boiling yet. So let's look. Nope, not yet. Though I don't know if you could see it. There was steam that came off the liquid, so that's good. It indicates that the liquid is getting warm. It's just not hot enough yet to boil. If you don't know what boiling looks like, you would see in the liquid little bubbles. It would kind of appear that the bubbles were coming from underneath the surface and all of the liquid would be moving. So that's what we are waiting for. It's hard to wait. You know, there's actually a phrase that says a watched pot never boils. And that's because if you just sit here and wait for something in a pot to boil, it will feel like it takes forever. Of course, it will eventually boil. It just feels like it takes so much longer. So what I did was I took the opportunity, as I'm waiting for this to boil, to put my vegetables back in the fridge and to clean up my workspace. You should still be near the pot. So, you know, because there's heat heat on it and you want to make sure that everything's okay. But you could definitely use this as a great time to get cleaned up, so then you won't have to do that when your soup is ready or after you've eaten. So until it boils, we just wait. All right, well, we are steaming and there is clearly something going on in this pot, so we are going to check that out. Before we do though, we're going to remember that everything about this pot and burner is hot. So we are not going to touch anything that we think might be hot. These rubber handles are okay, but that's about it. The other thing that we need to know is that when we lift the lid off this pot, that steam is going to feel very, very warm, as is the water on the top of the lid. So we need to be very careful to keep our body, our hand, out of the way of the steam and out of the way of the water. All right, so knowing that, let's go ahead and see what we've got. Oh, and look at that. It is boiling. Oh, I wish you could smell it. It smells so good. Okay, so I'm going to put the lid back on, and now we're going to go back to our recipe, and we are going to see it says bring to a boil, then reduce heat, and simmer 20 minutes before serving. So, okay, so now I am going to lower the heat down to low, and then I'm going to set my timer for 20 minutes, and then it will be time to eat the soup. All right, so our 20 minutes of simmering has passed, and now we are able to open this up and look at our yummy, yummy soup. Everything is still very hot, even though we lowered the temperature. So be aware of that. The steam, the water, obviously, the pot, and the burner. But it looks so yummy. I would love to dig in. So this is the time that you would now bundle this up and take it to a neighbor or a friend. You know, you may take it to them warm. If you wanted to take it to them warm, you would need to make sure that you were putting your soup into a ceramic or glass container, and then you would maybe wrap it up with towels to try to keep it warm, and you could take it and deliver it to them. You might also include maybe a loaf of bread or a bag of salad so that they could have an entire meal. Or you could deliver it to them cold. So what you could do is you could let this cool and then put it in the refrigerator and then put it in a plastic container, take it to them, and then along with the reheating instructions, which would be, you know, put it in a bowl, put it in the microwave for 1 to 2 minutes and heat it up. You could do it that way too. That way they don't have to be right at the door ready to take the soup off of your hands. It's whatever works for your situation. Different times I might take something warm, different times I might take something cool. But you know what? They are going to so appreciate this, however they get it from you. It's so wonderful to be able to be doing something like this for other people along with you. I love that you are such a warm and giving, kind-hearted person. Thank you so much for making the world a better place. Thanks so much for learning how to cook soup with me too. You know, this is an important life skill as well. If you didn't have a neighbor or a friend that needed chicken noodle soup, you definitely could make this for yourself. It's just a perfect, easy meal, and now you will always know how to make it. Well, I look forward to seeing you on Saturday when we will be talking about a wonderful woman. Until then, thanks so much for joining me. Thanks for making the world a better place. Thanks for kidding around with me. I will see you next time.